know why that does that. Hi, everybody. This is Allison from Alleycat Creations. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, all connected, an epiphany, a mind-blowing moment, a new book to read, a new author to explore, artwork, oracle cards, you can all check that out underneath the video. Is a bunch of links and descriptions. Allylatkreations211.com is my website, so go check that out. It's fun. There's a lot of things there. Some are for sale, some are not for sale. It's just an overall generalization of my work. And hi, finally getting to a Blavatsky read. Finally, I swear I do this before I start a video, I'm always like making sure I'm not itchy and I don't know what's going on. Anywho, I'm going to do Blavatsky later today. Besides moderating We Not Me, I will be on Turn the Page with Janine. I want to say 6 Central, 7 Eastern. So it's going to be concurrent with We Not Me. So I'm going to have to figure out a laptop setup so I can do both jobs. Talk and moderate. It's going to be fun. I don't mind. Information needs to get out. But right now, let's get on to Blavatsky. Scientific and exoteric evidence for and objections to the modern nebular theory. This should be quite interesting. Of the late esoteric cosmogony has been frequently opposed by the fandom of this theory and its ensuing hypothesis. Can this most scientific teaching be denied by your adepts? It is asked, not entirely is the reply, but the admission of the men of science themselves kill it, and there remains nothing for the adepts to deny. To make of science an integral whole necessitates, indeed, the study of spiritual and psychic as well as physical nature. Otherwise, it will never be like the autonomy of man, discussed of old by the profane from the point of view of his shell side and in ignorance of the interior work. Before his initiation of such statements as the liquids pass into the stomach through the lungs, without metaphysics, as Mr. H.J. Slack says, real science is inadmissible. The nebulae exist, yet the nebular theory is wrong. A nebula exists in the state of entire elemental disassociation. It is gaseous and something else besides, which can hardly be connected with the gases as known to physical science, and it is self-luminous. But that is all. The 62 coincidences enumerated by Professor Stephen Alexander confirming the nebular theory may all be explained by esoteric science, though as this is not an astronomical work, the refutations are not attempted at present. Laplace and Frey came nearer to the correct theory than any, but of the speculations of Laplace, there remains little in the present theory except its general features. Nevertheless, there is in Laplace's theory, says John Stuart Mill, nothing hypothetical. It is an example of legitimate reasoning from present effect to its past cause. It assumes nothing more than that objects which really exist obey the laws which are known to be obeyed by all terrestrial objects resembling them. This from, yay, there's my brain. Sorry, guys. Such an eminent logician as Mill was, would be valuable if it could only be proved that terrestrial objects resembling celestial objects at such a distance as the nebula are resemble those objects in reality and not alone in appearance. Another of the fallacies from the occult standpoint, which are embodied in the modern theory as it now stands, is the hypothesis that the plants were all detached from the sun, that they are bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh, whereas the sun and planets are only co-Utarian brothers, having had the same nebular origin, only in a different mode from that postulated by modern astronomy. The many objections raised against the homogeneity of original diffuse matter on the ground of the uniformity in the composition of the fixed stars by some opponents of the modern nebular theory do not affect the question of that homogeneity at all, but only the said theory. Our solar nebula may not be completely homogeneous, or rather it may fail to reveal itself as much and as such to the astronomers, and yet be de facto homogeneous. The stars do differ in their constituent materials and even exhibit elements quite unknown on Earth. Nevertheless, this does not affect the point that the primeval matter, as it appeared even in its full differentiation from its Laya condition, is yet to this day homogeneous at immense distances in the depths of infinitude, and likewise at points not far removed from the outskirts of our solar system. Finally, there does not exist one single fact brought forward by the learned objectors against the nebular theory, false as it is, and hence illogical enough, fatal to the hypothesis of the homogeneity of matter, that can withstand criticism. One error leads into another. A false premise will naturally lead to a false conclusion, although an inadmissible inference does not necessarily affect the validity of the major proportion of the syllogism. Thus, one may leave every side issue and inference from the evidence of spectra and lines as simply provisional for the present, and abandon all matters of detail to physical science. The duty of the occultist lies with the soul and spirit of cosmic space, not merely with its elusive appearance and behavior. That of official physical science is to analyze and study its shell, the ultima thule of the universe and man, in the opinion of materialism. With the latter, occultism has naught to do. It is only with the theories of such men of learning as Kepler, Kant, Olsted, and Sir W. Herschel, who believed in a spiritual world that occupied the occult cosmogony, might treat and attempt a satisfactory compromise. But the views of those physicists differed vastly from the last modern speculations. Kant and Herschel had in their mind's eye speculations upon the origin and the final destiny, as well as the present aspect of the universe, from a far more philosophical and psychic standpoint, whereas modern cosmology and astronomy now repudiate anything like research into the mysteries of being. The result is what might be expected: complete failure and inextractable contradictions in the thousands and one varieties of so-called science theories. And in this theory, as in all others, the nebular hypothesis involving the theory of the existence of primeval matter, diffuse in a nebulous condition, is of no modern date in astronomy or anyone known. Anaximenes of the Ionian school had, I totally butchered that name, by the way, had already taught that the sidereal bodies were formed through the progressive condensation of a primordial progenic matter, which had almost a negative weight and was spread out through space in an extremely sublimated condition. Tycho Brahe, who viewed the Milky Way as an ethereal substance, thought the new star that appeared in Cassiopeia in 1572 had been formed out of the matter. Kepler believed the star of 1606 had been likewise formed out of the ethereal substance that fills the universe. He attributed that the same ether, the apparition of the luminous ring around the moon, during the total eclipse of the sun observed at Naples in 1605. The existence of a self-luminous matter was recognized by Halley. Finally, the journal of this name published in 1811 the famous hypothesis on the transformation of the nebulae into stars by the eminent astronomer Sir W. Herschel, after which the nebula theory was accepted by the Royal Academies. In 5 Years of Theosophy, on page 245, an article headed, "Do the Adepts Deny the Nebula Theory?" may be read. The answer there is given no. They do not deny its general propositions, nor the approximate truth of the scientific hypothesis. They only deny the completeness of the present, as well as the entire era of the many so-called exploded old theories, which during the last century have followed each other in such rapid succession. This was proclaimed at the time an evasive answer. Such disrespect to the official science, it was argued, must be justified by the presentation to replace the orthodox speculation of another theory, more complete than theirs, and having a firmer ground to stand upon. To this there is but one reply. It is useless to give out isolated theories with regard to things embodied in a whole and constitutive system, which, when separated from the main body of the teaching, would necessarily lose their vital coherence and thus do no good when studied independently. To be able to appreciate and accept the occult views on the nebular theory, one has to study the whole esoteric cosmological system, and the time has hardly arrived for the astronomers to be asked to accept Fohat and the divine builders. Even the undeniably correct surmises of Sir W. Herschel that had nothing supernatural in them, about the sun being called the globe of fire, perhaps metaphorically, and his early speculations about the nature of that which is now called the Nazith willow leaf theory, caused the most eminent of all astronomers to be smiled at by others, far less eminent colleagues who saw and now see in his ideas only imaginative and fanciful theories. Before the whole esoteric system could be given out and appreciated by the astronomers, they would have to return to those of antiquated ideas, not only to those of Herschel, but to the dreams of the oldest Hindu astronomers, and to abandon their own theories, nonetheless fanciful, because they have appeared in one case nearly 80 years and in the other many thousands of years later. Foremost of all, they would have to repudiate the ideas on the sun's solidity and incandescence, the sun glowing, most undeniably, but not burning. Then it is stated with regard to Sir W. Herschel's views that those objects, as he called the willow leaves, are the immediate sources of the solar light and heat. And though the esoteric teaching does not regard these as he did, namely organisms, as partaking of the nature of life, for the solar beings will hardly place themselves within telescopic focus, yet it asserts that the whole universe is full of such organisms, conscious and active according to the proximity or distance of their planes to, or form, our plane of consciousness. And that finally the great astronomer was right in saying that we do not know the vital action is competent to develop at once heat, light, and electricity, while speculating on those supposed organisms. For at the risk of being laughed at by the whole world of physicists, the occultists maintain that all the forces of the scientists have their origin in vital principle, the one life collectively of our solar system, that life being a portion, or rather one, of the aspects of the one universal life. We may therefore, as in the article under consideration, wherein an authority of the adepts, it was maintained that it is sufficient to make a resume of what the solar physicists do not know. We may maintain the defined our position with regard to the modern nebular theory and its evident incorrectness by simply pointing out facts diametrically opposed to it in its present form. And to begin with, what does it teach? Summarizing the aforesaid hypothesis, it becomes plain that Laplace's theory, now made quite unrecognizable, moreover, was an unfortunate one. He postulates in the first place cosmic matter, existing in a state of diffused nebulosity, so fine that its presence could hardly have been suspected. No attempt is made by him to penetrate into the arcana of being, except as regards the immediate evolution of our small solar system. Consequently, whether one accepts or rejects this theory in its bearing upon the immediate cosmological problems presented for solution, he can only be said to have thrown back the mystery a little further to the external query, whence matter itself, whence the evolutionary impetus determining its cyclic aggregations and dissolutions, whence the exquisite symmetry and order into which the primeval atoms arrange and group themselves. No answer is attempted by Laplace. All were confronted with. It's a sketch of the probable broad principles on which the actual process is assumed to be based. Well, and what is this now celebrated note on the said process? What has been given so wonderfully new and original that its groundbreaking work, at any rate, should have served as a basis for the modern nebula theory? This is what one gathers from various astronomical works. Laplace thought that consequent on the condensation of atoms of the primeval nebula, according to the law of gravity, the now gaseous or perhaps partially liquid mass acquired a rotary motion. As the velocity of this rotation increased, it assumes the form of a thin disk. Finally, the centrifugal force overpowering that of cohesion, huge rings were detached from the edge of the whirling incandescent masses, contracting necessarily by gravitation as accepted into a spheroidal bodies, which would necessarily still continue to preserve the same orbit occupied previously by the outer zone from which they were separated. Laplace conceived that the external and internal zones of the rings would rotate with the same angular velocity, which would be the case with a solid ring, but the principle of equal areas requires the inner zones to rotate more rapidly than the outer. The velocity of the outer edge of each nascent planet, he said, exceeding that of the inner, there results a rotation on its axis. The more dense bodies would be thrown off last, and finally, during the preliminary state of their formation, the newly segregated orbs in their turn throw off one or more satellites. In formulating the history of the rapture and planetation of rings, Laplace says, now I have to move up because I can't see a thing. Quote, almost always each ring of vaporous must have broken up into numerous masses, which moving with a nearly uniform velocity must be continued to circulate at the same time, same distance around the sun. These masses must have taken a spheroidal form with a motion of rotation in the same direction as their revolution, since the inner molecules, those nearer to the sun, would have less actual velocity than the exterior ones. They must then have formed many planets in a state of vapor. But if one of them was sufficiently powerful to unite successfully, but in its attraction, all the others around its center, the ring of vapors must have been thus transformed into a single spheroidal mass of vapor circulating around the sun with a rotation in the same direction as its revolution. The latter case has been more common, but the solar system presents us the first case. In the four small planets which move between Jupiter and Mars, while few will be found to deny the magnificent audacity of this hypothesis, it is impossible not to recognize the insurmountable difficulties with which it is attended. Why, for instance, do we find that the satellites of Neptune and Uranus display a retrograde motion that in spite of its closer proximity to the sun, Venus is less dense than the Earth. Similarly, the more distant Uranus is more dense than Saturn. How is it that so many variations in the inclination of their axes and orbits are present in the supposed progeny of the central orb, that such startling variations in the size of the planets is noticeable, that the satellites of Jupiter are more dense by 0.288, they are primary, then the phenomena of the metric and cosmic systems still remain unaccounted for. To quote the words of a master, quote, "They, the occultists, find that the centrifugal theory of Western birth is unable to cover all the ground, that unaided it can neither account for every oblate spheroid, nor explain away such evident difficulties as they are presented by the relative density of some planets. How indeed can any calculation of centrifugal force explain to us, for instance, why Mercury, whose rotation is, we are told, only about 1/3 that of the Earth, and its density only about 1/4 greater than the Earth, should have a polar compression more than 10 times as great as the latter? And again, why Jupiter, whose equatorial rotation is said to be 27 times greater and its density only about 1/5 that of the Earth, should have its polar compression 17 times greater than that of the Earth, or why Saturn, with its equatorial velocity 55 times greater than Mercury for centripetal force to contend with, should have its polar compression only 3 times greater than Mercury's. To crown the above contradictions, we are asked to believe in the central forces as taught by modern science, even when told that the equatorial matter of the sun, with more than 4 times the centrifugal velocity of the Earth's equatorial surface, and only about 1/4 part of the gravitation of the equatorial matter, has not manifested any tendency to bulge at the solar equator, nor shown the least flattering of the poles of the solar axis. In other and clearer words, the sun, with only 1/4 of our Earth's density for the centrifugal force to work upon, has no polar compression at all. We find this objection made by more than one astronomer, yet never explained away satisfactorily as far as the adepts are aware. Therefore do they, the adepts, say that the great men of science of the West, knowing next to nothing either about cometary matter, centrifugal and centripetal forces, the nature of the nebulae, or the physical constitution of the sun, the stars, or even the moon, are imprudent to speak as confidently as they do about the central mass of the sun, rolling out into space, planets, comets, and whatnot. We maintain that the sun evolves only the life principle, the soul of those bodies giving and receiving it back, and in solar system as a universal life giver, in infinitude and eternity, that the solar system is as much the microcosm of the one macrocosm as man is the former when compared with his own little solar cosmos. The essential faculty possessed by all the cosmic and terrestrial elements of generating within themselves a regular and harmonious series of results, a concentration of causes and effects, is an irrefutable proof that they are either animated by an extra or intra intelligence, or concealed such within a behind the manifested veil. Occultism does not deny the certainty of the mechanical origin of the universe. It only claims the absolute necessity of mechanics of some sort behind those elements, or within a dogma with us. It is not the fortuitous assistance of the atoms of Lucretius, whom himself knew better than that built the cosmos and all in it. Nature herself contradicts such a theory. Celestial space containing matter so attenuated as is ether cannot be called on, with or without attention, to explain the common motion of the sidereal hosts, although the perfect accord of their mutual revolution indicates clearly the presence of a mechanical cause in nature. Newton, who of all men had best right to trust to his deductions and views, was nevertheless forced to abandon the idea ever explaining by the laws of known nature and its material forces, the original impulse given to the millions of orbs. He recognized fully the limits that separate the action of natural forces, from that of the intelligence that set the immutable laws into order and action. And if a Newton had to renounce such hope, which of the modern materialistic pygmies has the right of saying, I know better? To become complete and comprehensible, a cosmological theory has to start with a primordial substance diffused without boundless space, of an intellectual and divine nature. That substance must be the soul and the spirit, the synthesis and the seventh principle of the manifested cosmos. And to serve such as a spiritual upad to this, they must be the six, its vehicle, primordial physical matter, so to speak, though its nature must escape forever outlimited normal senses. It is easy for the astronomer, if endowed with an imaginative faculty, to build a theory of the emergence of the universe out of chaos, but simply applying to it the principles of mechanics. But such a universe will always prove that the respect to its scientific human creator, a Frankenstein's monster, it will lead him into an endless perplexities. The application of the mechanical laws only can never carry the speculator behind the objective world, nor will it unveil to men the origin and final destiny of cosmos. This is whether the nebula theory has its lead science. In sober fact and truth, this theory is twin sister to that of ether, and both are the offsprings of necessity, one as indispensable to account for the transmission of light as the other to explain the problem of the origin of the solar systems. The question with them is how the same homogeneous matter could obey the laws of Newton, given birth to bodies, suns, planets, and their satellites, subject to conditions of identity, of motion, and form of such heterogeneous elements. Has the nebular theory helped to solve the problem, even if applied solely to the bodies considered as innate and material? We say most decidedly not. What progress has it made since 1811, when Sir W. Herschel's paper, first presenting facts based on observation and showing the existence of nebular matter, made the sons of the Royal Society shout out for joy? Since then, a still greater discovery has permitted through spectrum analysis the verification and collaboration of Sir W. Herschel's conjecture. Laplace demanded some kind of primitive world stuff to prove the idea of progressive world evolution and growth. Here it is as offered 2 millennia ago. The world stuff, now nebulae, was known from the highest antiquity. Anaxagoras taught that, having differentiated the subsequent commixture of her heterogeneous substances, remained motionless and unorganized until finally the mind, the collective body of Dihan Kohans, we say, began to work upon and communicated to it motion and order. The theory is now taken up in its first portion that of any mind interfering with it being rejected. Spectrum analysis reveals that the evidence of a nebulae formed entirely of gases and luminous vapors. It is this, the primitive nebular matter. The spectra revealed, it is said, the physical conditions of the matter, which emanates cosmic light. The spectra of the resolvable and the irresolvable nebulae are shown to be entirely different, the spectra of the latter showing their physical state to be that of glowing gas or vapor. The bright lines of one nebula reveal the existence of hydrogen in it and of any material substances known and unknown. The same in the atmospheres of the sun and stars. This leads to the direct interference that a star is formed by the condensation of a nebula. Hence that Even the metals themselves on Earth are formed and owing to the condensation of hydrogen or some other primitive matter, some astral cousin to helium, perhaps, or some yet unknown stuff. This does not clash with the occult teachings, and this is the problem that chemistry is trying to solve, and it must succeed sooner or later in the task accepting nolens volens when it does the esoteric teaching. But when this does happen, it will kill the nebular theory as now it stands. Meanwhile, astronomy cannot accept in any way, if it is to be regarded as an exact science, the present theory of affiliation of stars, even if occultism does so in its own way, as it explains this affiliation directly because astronomy has not one single physical datum to show for it. Astronomy could anticipate chemistry improving the existence of the fact if it could show a planetary nebula exhibiting a spectrum of 3 or 4 bright lines gradually condensing and transforming into a star with a spectrum all covered with a number of dark lines. But the question of the variability of the nebula, even as to their forms, is yet one of the mysteries of astronomy. The data of observation possessed so far are of too recent an origin, too uncertain to permit as to affirm anything. Since the discovery of the spectroscope, its magical power has revealed to its adepts only one single transformation of a star of this kind, and even that one showed directly the reverse of what is needed in proof favor of the nebula theory, namely a star transforming itself into a planetary nebula. As told in the Observatory Volume 1, page 185, the temporary star which appeared in the constellation Cygnus in November 1876, discovered by J.F.J. Schmidt, exhibited a spectrum broken by very brilliant lines. Gradually, the continuous spectrum and most of the lines disappeared, leaving finally one single brilliant line, which appeared to coincide with the green line of the nebula. Though this metamorphosis is not irreconcilable with the hypothesis of the nebular origin of the stars, nevertheless, the single solitary case rests on no observation whatever, least of all on direct observation. The occurrence may have been due to several other cases. Since astronomers are inclined to think our planets are tending toward precipitation on the sun, why should not the star have blazed out owing to a collision of such precipitated planets, or as many suggest, a pulse of a comet? Anyhow, the only known instance of a star transformation since 1811 is not favorable to the nebular theory. Moreover, on the question of this theory, as in other astronomers disagree. In our own age, it was Buffon, before Laplace ever thought of it, who, very much struck by the identity of motion in the planets, was the first to propose the hypothesis of the planets and their satellites originating in the bosom of the sun. Forthwith, and for the purpose, he invented a special comet supposed to have torn out by a powerful oblique blow the quantity of matter necessary to their formation. Laplace gave its dues to the comet in his exposition Du Système du Mundi. But the idea was seized and even improved upon by a conception of the alternate evolution from the sun's central mass of planets, apparently without weight or influence on the motion of the visible planets, and as evidently without any more existence than the likeness of Moses in the moon. But the modern theory is also variation on the system elaborated by Kant and Laplace. The idea both was that at the origin of things, all that matter which now enters into the composition of the planetary bodies was spread over all the space comprised in the solar system and even beyond. It was a nebula of extremely small density whose condensation gradually gave birth by a mechanism that has hereto never been explained to the various bodies of our systems. This is the original nebular theory, an incomplete yet faithful repetition, a short chapter out of the large volume of universal esoteric cosmogony of the teachings in the Secret Doctrine. In both systems, Kant's and Laplace's differ greatly from the modern theory, redundant with conflicting sub-theories and fanciful hypotheses. Quote, the essence of cometary matter and of that which composes the stars is totally different from any of the chemical or physical characteristics with which Western science is now acquainted. While the spectroscope has shown the probable similarity owing to the chemical action of terrestrial light upon the intercepted rays of earthly sidereal substance, the chemical actions peculiar to the variously progressed orbs of space have not been detected nor proven to be identical with those observed on our own planet. Says the teachers. Mr. Crooks says almost the same in the fragment quoted from his lecture, Elements and Meta-Elements. Quote, an utmost observes C. Wolf. Could the nebular hypothesis show in its favor with W. Herschel the existence of planetary nebulae in various degrees of condensation and of spiral nebula with nuclei of condensation on the branches and center? But in fact, the knowledge of the bound that unites the nebula to the stars is yet denied to us and lacking as we do direct observation. We are even debarred from establishing it, even on the analogy of chemical composition. It is evident that even if the men of science, leaving aside the difficulty of arising for them out of such undeniable variety and heterogeneity of matter in the constitution of nebulae, did admit with the ancients that the origins of all the visible and invisible heavenly bodies must be sought for in one primordial homogeneous world stuff in a kind of pre-prototile. It is evident that this would not put an end to their perplexities, unless they admit also that our actual visible universe is merely the Sathula Sharia, the gross body of the sevenfold cosmos. They will have to face another problem, especially if they risk maintaining that it is now visible bodies are the result of the condensation of that one and single primordial matter. For mere observation shows them that the actions which produce the actual universe are far more complex than could ever be embraced in the theory. First of all, there are two distinct classes of irresolvable nebulae, as science itself teaches. The telescope is unable to distinguish between the two, but the spectroscope can, and notices therefore an essential difference between their physical constitutions. Some of these, Wolf says, have a spectrum of 3 or 4 bright lines, others a continuous spectrum. The first are gaseous, the other formed of a pulverulent matter. The former must constitute a venerable atmosphere. It is among these that the solar nebula of Laplace has to be placed. The latter form an ensemble of particles that may be considered as independent and the rotation of which obeys the laws internal weight, such as the nebulae adopted by Kant and Fay. Observation allows us to place the one as the other at the very origin of the planetary world. But when we try to go beyond and ascend to the primitive chaos which has produced the totality of the heavenly bodies, we must first to account for the actual existence of these two classes of nebulae. If the primitive chaos were a cold, luminous gas, one could have understand how the contraction resulting from the attraction could have heated it and made it luminous. We have to explain the condensation of this gas to the state of incandescent particles. the presence of which is revealed to us in certain nebulae by the spectroscope. If the original chaos was composed of such particles, how did certain of their portions pass into the gaseous state while others have preserved their primitive condition? Such is the synopsis of the objection and difficulties to the acceptance of the nebular theory brought forward by the French savant, who concludes in his interesting chapter by declaring that the first part of the cosmological problem, that is the primitive matter of chaos, and how did the matter give birth to the sun and stars? This remains to this day in the dominion of romance and of mere imagination. If this is the last words of science upon that subject, whether then should one turn in order to learn what the nebular theory is supposed to teach? What, in fact, is this theory? What is? No one seems to know for certainty. What is it not? We learn from the erudic author of The World Life. He tells us that it is not a theory of evolution of the universe, but only and primarily a genetic explanation of the phenomena of the solar system, and necessarily a coordination of the principal phenomena in the stellar and nebular firmament, as far as human vision has been able to penetrate. That it does not regard the comets as involved in the particular evolution which has produced the solar system. It does not, because it too recognizes the comets as forms of cosmic existence, coordinated with earlier stages of nebular evolution, and it actually assigns to them chiefly the formation of all worlds. That it does not deny an anticipated history of the luminous fire mist, the secondary stage of evolution in the Secret Doctrine, and makes no claim to having reached an absolute beginning. And even it allows that this fire mist may have previously existed in a cold, non-luminous, and invisible condition. And that finally, it does not profess to discover the origin of things, but only a stadium in the material history, leaving the philosopher and theologian as free as they ever were to seek for the origin of the modes of being. But this is not all. Even the greatest philosopher of England, Mr. Herbert Spencer, arrayed himself against the fantastic theory by saying that the problem of existence is not resolved by it. The nebular hypothesis throws no light upon the origin of diffused matter, and that the nebular hypothesis as it now stands implies a first cause. The latter, we are afraid, is more than our modern physicists have bargained for. Thus, it seems that the poor hypothesis can hardly expect to find help or collaboration even in the world of the metaphysicians. Considering all this, the occultists believe that they have a right to present their philosophy, however misunderstood and ostracized it may be at present. And they maintain that this failure of the scientists to discover the truth is entirely due to their materialism and contempt for transcendental sciences. Yet, although the scientific minds in our century are as far more and far from the truth and correct doctrine of evolution as ever there may be, still some hope left for the future, as we find another great scientist given as a faint glimmer of it. In an article of Popular Science Review on recent researches in Minute Life, we find Mr. H.J. Slack, FCS, saying there is an evident convergence of all sciences, from physics to chemistry, physiology, towards some doctrine of evolution and development, of which the facts of Darwinism will form part. But what ultimate aspects this doctrine will take, there is little, if any, evidence to show, and perhaps it will not be shaped by the human mind until metaphysical as well as physical inquiries are much more advanced. This is a happy forecast indeed. The day may come then when the natural selection, as taught by Mr. Darwin and Mr. Herbert Spencer, will form only a part in its ultimate modification of our Eastern doctrine of evolution, which will be Manu and Kapla. esoterically explained. And we're going to end it there, guys. Next time, forces, modes of motion, or intelligences. Sorry this took so long to get done. Jeez Louise, guys, it's been bananas here in Casa Legata. I hope all of you had enjoyed that. It's very interesting to see that we're still discussing and finding new laws of science as I'm reading the old people doing, finding and learning and stretching things out. Crazy, but very much needed. My water is nice and crisp. So guys, I hope you enjoyed. Sending you each love, light, compassion, grace, protection, and shielding energy. Please be safe, be seen. And for all of you in the path of the storms the next couple of days, I know there's been tornadoes that dropped already today. Please be safe. Listen to your weather stations. My prayers for everybody. Please listen, take cover if you need. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you to all the new subscribers. It's been a blessing, and I'm very humbled by all of you. I know this is not everybody's cup of tea, but it is information that we need to learn from. Have a great rest of your day. Check me out tonight on Turn the Page with Janine on Rumble. I'm going to say 7 Eastern, 6 Central. I will be there talking about the eclipses, and hope to see you on the next one, guys. Bye for now.